Hi, I'm Odalys. I built our family company from scratch, turned it into a $9 billion legacy. But the day my father died, my mother stood before a room full of men and said, "It's time for real blood to lead." Then she handed everything to her golden stepson. No warning, no respect, just erasure. But what she didn't know was that my father left behind a sealed clause, and once I opened it, she would be the one begging me to spare her. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And have you ever been betrayed by your own blood? Now, let me tell you what happened next. The sky had that soft gray hue that never quite turned to rain, just heavy enough to settle in your bones. Chicago, midwinter. Nothing moved quickly. Not the wind, not the people, not the grief. I sat in the second pew, hands clasped, fingers pressed tight enough to ache. The church smelled like lilies and pine, that odd mix of mourning and Christmas leftovers. My father's casket sat at the front, polished and closed. He'd made that clear in his will. No open displays, no sobbing spectacle, he'd called it. Just quiet, simple, cold. My stepmother, Marceline, was in the front row, of course. Draped in black silk, her makeup flawless, not a single tear out of place. Beside her sat her son, Landrick. Designer suit, smug jawline, like he thought he was walking a red carpet instead of burying the man who built everything. My father had married Marceline after Mom passed. I was already 30 by then, and she'd treated me like furniture she couldn't throw out, but didn't want around either. People whispered as they filed in, faces I half remembered from boardrooms and family gatherings. A few old executives from the right group. I caught Mr. Henley's eye, Dad's old friend, gray-haired and still sharper than anyone I knew. He gave me a slight nod. Others didn't even glance my way. A couple offered condolences, but most just glanced at Landrick like he was already holding the keys. I wore my father's silver lapel pin. No one else noticed. But he and I, well, we knew what it meant. It had been his quiet way of saying, "This one listens." When the priest finally spoke, I barely heard a word. I'd already said my goodbye weeks ago, sitting by his hospital bed, holding his hand while the machines hummed around us. His last words to me were, "Don't let them shame you, Odalys. Not 1 inch." I hadn't cried since. After the service, we all shifted to the adjacent hall for the reception, if that's what you could call finger food, and too much awkward silence. People made small talk over meatballs on toothpicks. I moved between groups, nodding, thanking, but always watching. Then came the toast. Marceline stood by the fireplace holding a champagne flute like she was announcing the winner of a fashion gala. Her voice rang out above the murmurs. "To Gerald," she said, "a husband, a visionary, a man who built a legacy." Polite claps followed. She continued, "And as we close one chapter, we begin another. Gerald always believed that blood, true blood, should lead." I felt it before she said it. That tension in the room, the quick glance from Mr. Henley, the smug shift in Landrick's posture. She lifted her glass higher. "So today I honor Gerald's vision and introduce the new face of the right legacy, his son, Landrick." Some gasped softly, others clapped, awkward, unsure. Landrick grinned like he'd just won a game he didn't even play. I didn't move, couldn't speak. My heart didn't even beat. I swear, it just waited. Marceline added almost sweetly, "Gerald would have wanted real blood to lead." Real blood. A few board members nodded. One even raised his glass to Landrick. Mr. Henley didn't move. He looked at me instead, eyes steady. I stepped back, away from the room, away from their smiles. Outside, the wind hit me like truth. Bitter, sharp, familiar. I didn't cry, not then. I stared at the snow melting against my boots and wondered if my father had known this would happen. A moment later, I heard footsteps behind me. "Odalys," Mr. Henley said quietly, "you'll need to be smart. Very smart." I turned toward him. "They planned this." He didn't deny it, just looked tired. "Gerald didn't leave it all to luck. Look where he used to keep his private trust documents." He walked off before I could ask anything else. That night, the house was still. The help had gone home. Marceline and Landrick were likely still basking in their stolen glory. I walked down the hall to my father's old study, hand trailing along the mahogany paneling. Everything was as he left it. The lamp still turned slightly to the left, the chair still bearing the weight of absence. I stepped behind the desk, opened the lower drawer. Folders, contracts, old envelopes. And then I saw it. A sealed letter with my name, tucked under the file marked Wraith Trust, Private. The wax was unbroken. My hands shook as I held it. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered into the silence. The words barely left my lips before the sound of that seal cracking broke the silence like a pin dropping in a cathedral. The envelope gave no resistance, just that waxy snap and the soft scrape of old paper unfolding beneath my fingertips. My father's study had always smelled faintly of cigar wood and stubbornness. Tonight it smelled like the past catching up. Inside the envelope was a single handwritten note on thick cream paper. His handwriting, angular, sharp, like a man who never second-guessed a thing in his life. "Odalus, if you're reading this, then I am gone. There are men and vultures circling that company. Some wear suits. One married me. Use Clause 17B. You earned it, even if they'll never say it. But act fast. You only have 7 days. I never said it out loud. That was my mistake. But you were the only one who understood the fight. GW." Beneath that was a folded legal memorandum stamped with the Wright and Hale crest. The heading alone pulled my breath short. Executive Contingency Clause 17B. Enactment upon death. I sank slowly into the leather chair behind his desk, heart thudding against the edge of something I hadn't felt in years, hope, maybe. But it was tangled up with bitterness and grief so thick I could barely separate one from the other. Clause 17B granted me emergency control of all Class A voting shares for 7 days following his death, only if I invoked it in writing at the firm's legal offices within that window. It wasn't full ownership, but it was enough to hold the reins until the board convened. It was power, but not protection. I stared at the signature line. His name was there, bold and undeniable. I ran my fingers along the ink, cold, permanent. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what came next. Across the room, the grandfather clock groaned toward 1 a.m. I hadn't even taken my coat off since returning from the funeral. My feet still ached from standing too long in heels, but my mind, wide awake, racing. I leaned back, holding the letter against my chest, and closed my eyes. That office wasn't just his. It had been our battleground. There was a memory that wouldn't stop coming back. 6 months ago. Our last formal meeting. I'd just wrapped a deal in Tokyo, one that tripled our R&D assets. When I walked into the boardroom, he didn't look up. "They won't respect you," he muttered, flipping a page. I stood there, waiting. "Not unless you force them to." That was my father's love language. Not praise, not warmth, but preparation. Not once did he ever say he was proud. But every quarter, he let me renegotiate his own contracts. Every negotiation was a test, and I passed. Still, sitting there in the quiet, I found myself whispering the words I'd never dared say in front of him. "You could have just told me you loved me, Dad." But the clock didn't answer. Only the wind tapping against the frosted window pane like an impatient guest. I rubbed my temples. 7 days. And they'd already started moving. Just that morning, before the funeral even began, Marceline had been whispering to one of the younger board members. I saw her hand on his arm, the way she laughed at something he said, too loud and too polished to be real. And Landrick? He strutted through the room like a man who already had business cards printed. They weren't grieving, they were posturing, and here I was, still clutching a letter. I forced myself to stand. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the sun rise behind the skyline, slow, pale, unfeeling. Then I showered, dressed in a charcoal wool suit, and wrapped my hair into a low bun. No makeup, just focus. At exactly 8:03 a.m., I stepped into the marble lobby of Wright and Hale Legal. The receptionist, no older than 25, glanced up at me with the practiced indifference of someone who'd already been told who mattered and who didn't. "I'm here to speak to senior counsel," I said evenly. Her eyes barely flicked to my face. "And you are?" "Odellis Wright." A pause, then a little smirk. "I was told not to process anything under that name. You're not on the officer list anymore." That sentence landed like ice water down the back of my spine. I was about to ask her to repeat it when a voice cut through from behind the frosted glass doors. "Odellis. Mr. Henley." He was in his 70s now, slower than he used to be, but sharp as ever. The last man in that office who still referred to my father as Jerry without flinching. He motioned for me to follow him. We walked in silence through the halls, past oil paintings of founding partners and glass-walled rooms where junior lawyers sipped espresso and debated mergers they didn't understand. Inside his office, he closed the door. He didn't ask questions. He simply took the letter, read it carefully, then nodded once. "You have 5 days," he said quietly. That receptionist said, "They're trying to run out the clock. Don't give them the chance. Can I file this with you?" "Not today. There's already a barrier in the system. But if you bring a physical letter with the clause formally cited, sealed, dated, we can override them. I'll be here, but you'll need to deliver it personally." I nodded. His gaze softened. "I knew he left something behind for you. I just didn't know it'd take this much courage to open." I left without another word. By the time I got home, the house felt colder than it had the night before. The fire in the den had long burned out. I poured myself a small glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out a clean sheet of stationery. No trembling this time. No tears. Just the steady scratch of ink on paper. I wrote out my formal intent to invoke Executive Clause 17B under the terms outlined in Gerald Wright's memorandum. Dated, initialed, sealed in a fresh envelope. I even used one of his old brass stamps, still sitting in the drawer like a silent nod from beyond. Then I sat back in the silence and looked at the fireplace. If they wanted a war built on blood, let's see how they handled one built on silence. I stood there in the dim light of my father's study, the draft letter still warm from the printer in my hand. I folded it carefully, slid it into a manila envelope, and sealed it, pressing my palm over the flap like it meant something. Maybe it did. It was barely past 6 when I stepped outside. The air still held the hush of morning, but my mind was already louder than any rush hour. By the time I reached the law firm, my fingers had gone cold. Mr. Renshaw's office was tucked deep within the stone and glass building Gerald once helped fund. The receptionist barely looked up when I walked in. She must have seen the envelope and knew. I didn't wait for her to ask. "He's expecting me," I said, and I was already halfway down the corridor. Inside, Renshaw stood behind his desk, adjusting the cuffs of his navy shirt like he had nowhere better to be. I handed over the envelope. He opened it slowly, read the page. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, he reached for the steel stamp beside him. Thud, the sound of authority, of finality. "It's done," he said. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then he looked me in the eye, something he'd never done with pity. But today, there was caution. "They'll come after your reputation first, then your mind." I held his gaze. "They'll have to find it first." I left with my stamped copy, tucked away in a sealed folder. It felt heavier than the original envelope, heavier than my father's silence. By the time I pulled into the corporate parking garage, the city had begun to buzz. The air smelled of burnt coffee and wet concrete, typical Tuesday. I took the elevator up, alone. My heels echoed. Every floor brought me closer to the battlefield. The boardroom looked different now. Not physically, but I felt it, like a shift in pressure just before a storm. Most of the directors were already seated. Some glanced at me, polite but unreadable. No hostility, yet. Then the doors swung open again. Marceline entered first, her heels like gunshots. Landrick followed, adjusting his cuffs, flashing that crocodile grin he always wore when he thought he was about to win something. I didn't bother to sit. I walked to the head of the table and placed the stamped clause down where everyone could see. "This," I said, "is Clause 17B, drafted under my father's oversight, activated this morning. I now hold emergency voting control of all Class A shares until a formal vote is convened." Silence, then rustling papers, whispered breaths. Landrick smirked. "Is this a joke?" Marceline tilted her head. "You were never listed as successor. You've been unstable for years." There it was, the opening shot. I stood still. "You can question my sanity, but this," I tapped the clause, "was notarized by your own firm, and witnessed by a man your father trusted more than either of you." From the far end of the table, Mr. Brentley rose. His hair, once jet black, now silvered and combed straight back. "I served beside Gerald for over 40 years, he said, voice rough like gravel. "That clause came through my hands. He intended this, whether you like it or not." Next to him, Mrs. Dorsey adjusted her glasses and added, "He didn't train you two, he trained her. Every board review, every contingency drill, she was in the room, you weren't." The room shifted, like furniture being rearranged without a sound. Marceline flushed. Landrick leaned back, arms crossed, but that smirk was gone. Mr. Renwick, the board secretary, cleared his throat. "Given the legitimacy of the document, I propose a pause in succession. 14-day review. Interim leadership to remain with Miss Wright." Vote passed. 7-5. I didn't smile. Not yet, but my hands trembled under the table. Not from fear, from the ghost of my father. I could almost hear him mutter, "That's my girl." When the meeting ended, I slipped out the side door and kept walking. The marble floors blurred under my feet. I didn't make it home until after sunset. The TV was still on from the morning, some late talk show flickering in the background. I dropped the folder on the kitchen counter and poured a glass of water. Then, my phone buzzed. News alert. Anonymous sources from the Wright estate claimed I was mentally unfit to lead, citing alleged episodes, a family history of emotional instability, and erratic behavior during grief. My photo flashed across the screen, a headshot from a charity gala, smiling, exhausted, eyes a little too glassy under the stage lights. I sat down hard. This wasn't a smear. This was a surgical strike. They weren't trying to beat me. They wanted to bury me before I could draw breath. Then a text. "Henley, they're going dirty. Don't lose your mind to match theirs. You need to strike back, without losing who you are." I stared at the screen, then got up, walked to the back office where my father's old things were stored, opened the drawer he always kept locked but never truly hid. Inside, among dusty files and hardbound ledgers, was a black USB drive marked in block letters, GW. Confession. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen blinked once, then again, then his voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, it means the wolves came for you." My hand hovered over the pause button, but I couldn't press it. My father's voice, steady but worn, filled the quiet of my office like smoke seeping through old floorboards. He wasn't reading from a script. He was just talking. To me. "Odellis," he said softly, "if this is playing, then I didn't win. Not in the way I wanted to. That means Marceline made her move, or someone did on her behalf." I felt the breath tighten in my chest. His face on the screen looked older than I remembered, not in years but in weight, in knowing. "You were never supposed to be a backup plan," he continued. "You were the only one I trained, the only one who listened when no one was watching." He looked off camera, maybe at a note he scribbled or at nothing at all. Then, his voice lowered. "There are 3 people you can trust. At least, I hope you still can by now. Brentley, Dorsey, and Henley. But even then, Odellis, don't hand over everything, not unless the house is on fire." I sat back, eyes fixed on the flickering screen. Gerald Wright, who'd terrified executives with silence alone, was now just a father leaving behind a flashlight in a collapsing mine. "They'll attack your name," he said. "That's the first step. Then they'll try to break your mind, make you look unhinged, because if they can't beat you on facts, they'll beat you on perception." A long pause. His expression softened. I should have said this more. I should have said it clearer. You earned this. Don't let them convince you otherwise. The video cut to black. I stared at the empty screen for minutes, unmoving, holding grief in one hand and strategy in the other. Then, quietly, I slid the flash drive back into its metal case and tucked it under the false bottom of my drawer. By morning, the war came knocking. A thick envelope arrived at my front gate, legal notice. I didn't open it right away. I knew it was trouble. Trouble always had a certain weight. This one was heavy. I waited until I was seated, coffee cooling beside me, then opened it slowly. The allegations were blunt: misuse of company funds, $300,000 in total, connected to a children's literacy nonprofit I'd helped support years ago. The documents claimed blurred lines, implied personal benefit under corporate disguise. I closed the folder. I didn't have to guess where this came from. Marceline wanted blood. I turned on the television. As if on cue, one of the morning talk panels was mid-discussion. And now there are questions surrounding Odalus Wright's use of company dollars. A non-profit for children, sure, but is this a case of blurred lines or something more calculated? I watched my own photo appear next to a chyron that read, "Wright heiress under fire?" I muted the screen. Let them speculate, let them circle. But I wouldn't flinch. By late afternoon, I drove out to the edge of town. Past the fast food strips and real estate signs, tucked behind an aging library, was a modest brick building with a paper sign that still read, "Closed for COVID," even though the world had moved on. Inside, Mrs. Kovac waited for me, stoic in her cardigan and pearl clip-ons, hands folded neatly in her lap. "You knew they'd try this," she said without needing a hello. "Didn't you?" "I hope not this early," I admitted. Beside her, the nonprofit's financial auditor, a quiet man named Jerome, opened a manila folder. Every receipt, every ledger, every paper trail was intact. I didn't touch them. I just looked them both in the eye. "I need you to hold on to those," I said. "Don't release anything. Not yet." Jerome raised an eyebrow. "You're not going public?" "Not unless they double down," I replied. "If they swing again, we swing back, with truth. But only when it matters most." Mrs. Kovac's mouth curled slightly. "Your father would have liked that." I left them with a nod and a whispered thank you. On the way back, the evening sun dipped low, slicing across the windshield like a blade. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the silence more than sound. But silence wasn't on the menu for long. The next morning, an unmarked envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address. It was slim, barely the size of a paperback, but inside was a thumb drive wrapped in a sticky note that simply read, "You'll want to hear this." I locked my office door, drew the blinds, and slid the drive into the port. The audio was scratchy at first, then sharpened. Landrick's voice. "We bring them in. We paint her as outdated, emotional, fragile." Another voice chimed in. "Marceline, likely. She's got her daddy's old files, sure, but no one's following a ghost." Then Landrick again, colder this time. "She's weak. She was always the obedient shadow. Let her crumble." My hand curled into a fist, nails pressing crescents into my palm. They weren't even pretending anymore. They thought the whispers were safe in locked rooms, but someone in that room didn't agree and handed me the proof. I sat there for a long while, the drive still humming. The room was nearly dark now, the last traces of sunlight gone. I stared into that emptiness, not angry, not broken, just clear. Then I spoke, barely above a whisper. "You've never seen what I look like when I stop being obedient." I didn't say it to anyone. Just into the dark, into the stale hush of my office. But the words tasted like steel, heavy, final. And as I sat alone, back straight in my chair, I finally felt it. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, sharp, focused, like a wire pulled taut. I didn't wait long. That night, I forwarded the audio file to Mr. Renshaw, our company's original corporate counsel, long retired but still sharp as a tack. And to Ava Truss, a PR consultant I'd trusted once when we had a product recall scandal in 2015. She was quiet, lethal with words, and allergic to theatrics. In the email subject line, I typed, Phase 2, not for public release, yet. Then I shut my laptop. The next morning, I wore gray slacks and a plain navy blouse. Nothing flashy. I didn't want to look like I was trying to win anything. Just steady, reliable. The kind of woman who didn't need to shout to be heard. By 10 a.m., I had coffee in front of me and 2 board members in my office, Mr. Delaney and Mrs. Boyd. Neutral faces in the recent chaos, loyal to no one but their stocks. I didn't waste time. I'm offering full transparency, I said, handing them each a printed copy of the company's financial audit from the last quarter. No edits, no omissions. If you're with me, you get facts. If not, then I'll treat you like you already chose a side. Delaney glanced at the papers, mouth twitching. And if we stay neutral? I leaned in, steady. There's no such thing anymore. We sat in silence for a moment. Boyd tapped the edge of her paper slowly. Then she nodded once. We'll need time. Take it, I said, but not too much. By evening, I pulled into the family estate. The gate scanner blinked red. Tried again. Nothing. I rolled down my window, waved at the security guard behind the glass booth. Greg. He used to bring me peppermint gum from the gas station near his house when I was a kid. He didn't move. So I called. No answer. It wasn't until the 3rd attempt that the intercom finally buzzed to life, and I heard Marceline's voice. I changed the access, she said coolly. You don't live here anymore. There was no trace of hesitation, no anger either, just ice, flat, hard ice. I stepped out of my car. You emptied Dad's study, didn't you? His files are irrelevant now, don't embarrass yourself. I'll be taking some of my things. Your room's been turned into a guest suite. There's nothing left with your name on it. I stood there, gripping the keys in my hand. The same gravel driveway where I used to ride my bike after school. The same window where Dad used to stand when I left for college. And now, nothing. I didn't argue, didn't bang the gate. I just turned, got in my car, and drove. Not home, not yet. Instead, I pulled into a storage facility on 9th Street, one of Dad's old corporate units. I hadn't been there in years, but the keycard still worked. Marceline must have forgotten it existed. Inside, under dust and time, I found them. Boxes marked with Wright Industries' old logo, cracked and faded. I scanned until I saw a file labeled Succession Contingency, Personal. Inside, there it was. A letter, typed and signed. To the Board of Wright Industries. If any challenge to the line of succession arises after my death, this is to confirm my personal directive. Odalys Elaine Wright shall be recognized as my successor. Regardless of whispers, let her work speak louder. Not a will, but close. And in a power game like this, sometimes proximity to truth was just enough. I didn't call anyone, didn't post. I scanned the letter, saved it in 3 secure folders, and placed the original back in a fireproof binder. Then, I slept. The following day, a headline broke. Wright Industries consultant deal under scrutiny, $2.7 million to unlicensed advisor linked to Landrick Alden. The article included wire transfers, LLC documentation, and tax irregularities, all passed to a journalist named Porter Griggs. I'd handed him the file 2 days earlier, quietly, during a lunch meeting where no names were spoken aloud. By noon, I saw Marceline on TV. Obviously, these matters are being investigated internally. Mr. Alden's hiring decisions were made through the appropriate channels. I muted the screen. So predictable. Late evening came. I kicked off my heels at the door, poured myself a glass of water, and slid into a cardigan. Exhaustion pressed behind my eyes, but I didn't close them yet. Then I noticed something on the floor, just beneath the threshold. A plain envelope, no stamp, no name. I bent down slowly. Inside was a single sheet, red ink, no signature. You're being watched. Stop now or it gets personal. I held the note in my hands for a long moment. not shaking, not afraid. Then I folded it in half, placed it beside my mug, and said to the empty apartment, "Too late, it already is." I stood there, still holding the note that had been slipped under my door, its red ink bleeding across the page like a threat half-whispered. But I didn't tremble. Not this time. I folded it in half, tucked it into the back of my planner, and turned off the lamp on my nightstand. The room dimmed, but my mind didn't. By sunrise, the media storm had broken wide open. Landrick's $2.7 million consultant scandal had made it to the front page of 2 national outlets. One headline read, "Executive pays college friend for consulting. No work, no degree, no shame." Another, "Nepotism or fraud. Investors want answers." I didn't have time to read the comments. I had somewhere to be. At exactly 8:30 a.m., I stepped out of the black town car and walked through the tall glass doors of Wright Industries HQ, alone. No assistant, no press rep, no entourage. Just me, a navy suit, and a manila folder in my hand labeled Personal Accounts and Ethics Memo. The building buzzed with tension. Eyes followed me from the elevator all the way to the top floor. I could almost hear their thoughts. Is she coming back for good? Was it her who leaked it? I didn't answer. I walked straight into the boardroom, where half the directors were already seated, and the rest trickled in within minutes. Everyone looked tired, except Landrick. He sat at the head of the table like a man trying to act unbothered, though the corners of his mouth twitched every time someone looked at their phone. Mr. Renshaw entered last, shut the glass door behind him, and gave me a small nod. No smiles. This wasn't that kind of morning. "Let's begin," Brentley said, adjusting his glasses. "We've all seen the coverage, and some of us," he added, pointedly looking at Landrick, "are in the middle of a federal audit. Before anyone speaks, I believe Ms. Wright has something to present." Landrick didn't wait. "Oh, she always does," he said, voice oily. "Theatrics have always been her strength, never leadership." I ignored him. Instead, I walked to the table and placed the folder in front of Mr. Renshaw. "Inside," I said calmly, "you'll find itemized transfers, signed approvals, and emails connected to the consultant in question, cross-referenced with internal ethics policies." Then I pulled out a USB drive. "And this," I said, walking over to the conference laptop, "is the audio from the strategy dinner 2 weeks ago." Landrick's face tensed. Mr. Brentley pressed play. For the next 7 minutes, the only sounds in the room were cutlery clinks, laughter, and Landrick's voice, clear as day, mocking the board, bragging about buying loyalty, and scoffing at the idea of a female CEO unless it's for PR points. When the audio cut off, no one moved, not even Landrick. Then Marceline stood up. Her hands clenched the edge of the table. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage. "This company was never meant for her," she snapped. "Gerald made a mistake. She's not built for this. She never was." Several heads turned, phones in hand. She didn't notice, or didn't care. He raised her too soft, too sentimental. She doesn't have what it takes. "Mrs. Wright," Mr. Brentley said cautiously, "this meeting is being streamed per compliance policy." But it was too late. The intern in the corner, barely 21, didn't even blink. The live stream had already picked up Marceline's meltdown, broadcasting to legal monitors and, shortly after, to the rest of the internet. I watched my stepmother's face flush as she realized what she'd just done. And then, she vanished. Walked out the door without another word. By noon, her rant was clipped, captioned and trending. This company was never meant for her. Marceline Wright exposed. The internet did what the legal system couldn't. Public judgment came fast, and it didn't miss. Landrick tried to hold on. He released a statement that same afternoon blaming a coordinated attack and family betrayal. But it didn't help. His accounts were frozen. The so-called consultant had vanished. And me? I didn't celebrate. That evening, I sat alone in the office that used to be my father's, the one they'd once stripped clean. Now it was mine again. The leather chair still groaned the same way it had when he used to lean back in it. The blinds caught the golden end-of-day sun just like they always had. I rested my hand on the desk. Winning didn't feel like I thought it would. No satisfaction, no thrill, just quiet. Because survival isn't about applause. It's about still being here after everyone tried to erase you. I opened the drawer on the right. Inside were old files, pens, a worn photograph of me at 12 standing beside Dad at a holiday party, and under that, taped to the back of the drawer, was an envelope, handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was addressed simply, "To my daughter, if she ever comes back." I hesitated, then opened it. The letter was dated 6 years ago. "Odellis, I made you fight for a seat that should have always been yours. I thought that would make you strong. I thought challenge would shape you the way it shaped me. But maybe all you ever wanted was to be seen as family, not just as the successor. I'm sorry." Dad. I didn't cry right away. I sat with the letter in my lap, my hand over my mouth, letting the silence do what words never could. It wasn't enough, but it was something. A tap on the door broke the moment. My assistant poked his head in, holding a clipboard. "They're ready for you," he said gently. "The media panel wants to hear your side of the story." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my coat pocket. I stood up, smoothed the front of my blazer, and walked toward the door. I turned to him and said, quietly but firmly, "Then it's time they met the real me." The car ride to the studio was quiet. Not the kind of silence that stretches with awkwardness, but the steady calm that follows a storm you've already survived. I looked out the window as we passed the courthouse where Marceline had once posed for press photos, grinning beside my father like the devoted daughter-in-law. That was a lifetime ago, or maybe just last season. Funny how betrayal rearranges time. By the time we pulled up to the network building, the sun was starting to settle low over the city. Warm gold streaked the glass facade. My assistant, Harper, gave me a quick nod before stepping out first. The air smelled like old leaves and new beginnings. Inside, I was met with a blur of powder brushes, mic wires, and the firm grip of the producer who whispered, "You ready, Ms. Wright?" I nodded. "Let's get this over with." The lights on the set were almost too bright, but I didn't flinch. I sat opposite the anchor, Melissa Taburn, a woman known for asking the kind of questions that make people stumble, but I had nothing left to trip on. "We're live in 3, 2... Melissa's voice turned to velvet. "Good evening, America. Our guest tonight is a woman whose name has flooded headlines over the past month, Odellis Wright. In the wake of a corporate scandal, a public meltdown, and a dramatic boardroom shift, the question on everyone's mind is, who is she really?" She turned to me. "Ms. Wright, thank you for being here." I folded my hands on my lap. "Thank you for having me." Melissa leaned in slightly. "Why didn't you speak sooner?" I looked straight at the camera, not the anchor, not the crowd behind the lens, just the people watching from their kitchens, hospital beds, and recliners with slippers on. "Because when you're underestimated," I said slowly, "you collect receipts. And then, when it matters, you deliver them." There was a pause, a respectful one. The kind people give when truth lands and no one wants to be the first to look away. As the interview continued, the control room queued up footage from the boardroom. The moment I slid the audio file across the table, the silence that followed after Brentley hit play, Marceline's unhinged outburst captured by that trembling intern with a live-streaming badge. They showed clips of Landrick's face draining color. And then, a still of me, standing calm, folder still shut. Viewers flooded social media, not with gossip, but with something rare, admiration. "I didn't know who Odellis Wright was before," one tweet read, "but I do now, and I want my daughter to be like her." Midway through the segment, Melissa's producer handed her a card. She glanced at it, looked back at me with raised brows. "Ms. Wright, I've just been informed. Judge Helene Barrett has called into the station. She says she was a friend of your father's." My throat caught, not from fear, but recognition. Judge Barrett. I hadn't seen her since I was in college, when she gave me a book on women in leadership and told me, "Don't wait for permission." "She says she'd like to speak with you," Melissa added. Off camera. After the segment wrapped, I was led to a side room where the phone line had been patched through. I picked up. "Oh, Dallas," came the voice, warm and weathered. "You've grown into your name." I swallowed. "Judge Barrett, I didn't know you still kept up with—" "Your father didn't always know how to say what needed saying, but he told me, near the end, that he worried about what was happening around him. He didn't trust how the estate was being managed." I closed my eyes. "I'll testify," she said plainly. "I'll speak on the pressure Marceline placed on him, what I witnessed, what I warned him about." I didn't speak for a moment. I didn't have to. She knew. When I left the studio, the sky had deepened into that in-between color, somewhere between night and not yet. The city felt quieter, as if it too had heard the interview. 2 mornings later, a cease and desist letter landed on my desk, sealed in expensive paper and empty arrogance. Marceline had sent it, through her 3rd attorney, in 2 weeks. "You are hereby instructed to refrain from utilizing the Wright family brand in all public-facing efforts." I read the rest out loud to Harper. "You think she thinks she owns the name?" she asked, deadpan. "I think she's terrified no one believes she ever did." Instead of filing a legal response, I sent a press release. That afternoon, I stood at the podium in front of the same media pool that once whispered whether I was unstable. This time, I handed over a different kind of envelope. "Today," I said, "we're donating $5 million to fund a scholarship initiative for first-generation STEM students in honor of Gerald Wright." Flashes burst, questions flew, but I only added one more sentence. "The Wright name isn't a brand, it's a promise. Not one you inherit, but one you earn." The board met later that week. Brentley walked in, dropped a motion on the table and said, "Let's vote." 10 minutes later, the results were read aloud. Unanimous. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. That evening, I sat alone in what had once been my father's corner office. The nameplate had been changed. New brass, new polish. Odalus Wright, Chief Executive Officer outside. The sun was melting behind the skyline. I leaned back in the chair he once occupied and exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. Harper peeked in. "What now?" I turned toward the window. "We rebuild, not for revenge, for legacy." She nodded and left me to the quiet. I stayed a while longer, just thinking, not planning, just being. It was dark when I finally stood up and gathered my coat. On the way out, I passed the front desk where a mail clerk waved me down. "Something came for you. No sender. Just this." He handed me a plain envelope, soft with age. Postmarked from a rural address. No return name. Just one detail caught my breath. The sender line, G. Wright. I opened it slowly. Inside was a small brass key. No letter, no explanation. Just the quiet weight of something unfinished. I stared at it for a long time. There's still something he never told me. That thought stayed with me long after the sun dipped behind the hills outside the office window. The key in my hand was cold, heavier than it looked, tied with a single black thread to an envelope bearing no return name. Just coordinates. No note. No explanation. By the next morning, I was behind the wheel, heading up the Oregon coast. Miles of evergreens flanked both sides of the winding road. The deeper I drove into the forest, the more the GPS stuttered. Eventually, I lost signal altogether, but I kept going. The gate appeared like something out of another century. Black wrought iron, chained shut, rust biting into every curve. I stepped out and stared. The lock clicked open the second the key turned. No sound. No resistance. The driveway was overgrown with moss and pine needles, and as I walked toward the house I realized no one had touched this place in decades. A faded nameplate was nailed crooked on the porch. Maple Hollow. My father had never once mentioned owning a property here. Not once. Inside, the air was thick with stillness. Not the silence of peace, but of secrets sealed shut. Dust lay undisturbed on every shelf. The curtains were moth-eaten, sagging. But in the back, past a faded study and a narrow hallway, was a single reinforced door, locked. The second key turned and the door creaked open to reveal a file room, boxes, shelves, old tape reels, and one metal safe bolted into the floor. The tape to the front was a note, in my father's uneven scrawl. "This is where I buried what I couldn't fix." I stood there for a long time, unsure whether I was angry, or heartbroken. I spent the next several hours reading through ledgers yellowed with time, carbon copy contracts, and letters, most of them handwritten, all dated from the earliest years of Wright Industries. One folder stopped me cold. It was labeled Arcline Holdings, 1983. The name triggered a memory. A scandal from years ago. Foreign investors, a front company, shell accounts tied to arms trafficking. I remembered seeing it on the news when I was a teenager, back when I didn't know our family had any connection to it. I opened the file. There it was. The original investment document. Gerald Wright's signature. It wasn't a majority stake, but it was enough to get the company off the ground in its earliest days. A quiet deal, signed before Wright Industries ever went public. There were letters, years of them, detailing how he tried to cut ties, repurchase shares, buy silence, and finally, a document marked terminated, private settlement. But it wasn't enough. Another folder, newer, showed something else. Marceline had found these, too. She'd threatened exposure unless Gerald let her son Landrick inherit a high-level role in the company. It wasn't just nepotism, it was blackmail, and he gave in. My stomach tightened. So that was the weight behind his silences. Not just shame, but leverage, held by the woman he once trusted, and used against him. By dusk, I'd opened the safe. Inside were 3 things. A stack of bearer bonds from a now-defunct fund, a recorded video cassette labeled, "Only if she finds this," and a photo, me, at about 12, tucked into the corner, with a single line on the back in his script. "The real legacy isn't wealth, it's what we choose to carry." I didn't cry, but something in me shifted. That night I didn't return to the city. I stayed in the dust-covered house, sitting cross-legged in front of a dusty television, trying to find a working VCR. I watched the tape. It was short, less than 5 minutes. He looked older than I remembered. "If you're seeing this, it means you found the truth, and I'm sorry. I didn't tell you because I wanted to give you a clean path. But maybe that was never mine to give. This house, these files, they're yours now. Do with them what I couldn't. Make it right." It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. The next morning, I drove straight to the city and met with Judge Helene Barrett in a quiet coffee house tucked behind the courthouse. I told her everything, showed her everything. She listened quietly, stirred her tea, then asked one question. "Your father buried it to protect the brand. What will you protect, truth or memory?" I sat back in my chair. Memory can be sweet, but it can also be a lie we rehearse until we believe it. I was done rehearsing. 2 weeks later, Wright Industries released a full public statement and transparency report, authored by me. We didn't just disclose the historical investment, we mapped the full chain, outlined the internal audits, and launched a proactive ethics initiative inviting third-party oversight. It wasn't pretty. Stock dipped. Some longtime board members raised hell behind closed doors. But something else happened. Public support poured in. Emails, letters, news outlets ran stories about corporate responsibility and truth over image. A nonprofit ethics group awarded us Business Courage of the Year. For the first time, I felt the weight lift. We weren't hiding anymore. Not behind silence, not behind someone else's idea of what legacy meant. That evening, I walked into the office just as the sun was sinking behind the city skyline. My new nameplate caught the amber light like a quiet declaration, Odalis Wright, Chief Executive Officer. My assistant poked her head in. "Big day," she smiled. "What's next?" I looked down at the last file still sitting on my desk. The original Arcline contract. I just signed the document donating all remaining bonds to a foundation that supported investigative journalism. I turned to her and said, "We rebuild, not for revenge, for legacy." She nodded, then quietly stepped out. Just as I was locking up for the night, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number." I answered. The voice on the other end was gravelly, slow, measured. Male. "You made the wrong choice. The real family never forgives." I didn't flinch. I simply walked over to the window, looked down at the glowing skyline, and whispered to no one in particular, "Then I guess I was never theirs." I let the phone fall silent on the kitchen counter. No reply, no callback, just a dull tone echoing against the tile backsplash as I stared out into the stillness of the night. The trees outside didn't move, the wind had stopped, or maybe I just stopped noticing. That call should have rattled me. 5 months ago, it would have sent me spiraling, scrambling to prove I belonged, that I was worthy of a name, a seat, a signature. But tonight, I poured the last of the coffee into a mug, sat down, and finished reading my notes for the morning. By 7:30 a.m., the ballroom at the Wright Industries headquarters was already buzzing. The annual general meeting had always been a spectacle: brushed metal, soft lighting, chairs lined in military precision. But this year, it felt different, not grander, just heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood behind the podium, no teleprompter, no PR cues, just me, the board, and more than 1,000 shareholders. Some holding on to $10 stock, some clutching decades of investment, all of them waiting. I took a breath. "We were never just numbers on spreadsheets," I said slowly. "We are the sum of silence, sacrifice, and stories we almost buried." There was a pause. Not the confused kind, the reverent kind. I continued, "This company wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born from a man who worked 18-hour shifts, who made mistakes he never told us about, and who still left me, his daughter, not just a title, but a question. What now?" My eyes swept across the faces, some older than me, some younger, many skeptical. A few, like Judge Barrett in the back, watching with a quiet, piercing stillness. "We've seen the cracks," I said. "The ones we painted over for too long, and now we've chosen to tell the truth, not because it's convenient, but because it's right." A beat. Then I stepped back. The vote began. Hands raised, clickers clicked, monitors flickered, and when it was done, a new plaque was placed at the entrance of the executive floor. Wright Leadership Code, established 2025, in honor of Odellis Wright. I didn't cry, but something inside me did finally exhale. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the coast, I sat in my office, scrolling through notifications, media outlets buzzing about a new era. Some praised it, some picked it apart, but none of that made me pause until one headline caught my eye. "Landrick Wright, detained at private port, attempted escape with falsified holdings." I tapped the video. There he was, face flushed, sleeves rolled, trying to shove past port officers. "This is my property, I'm a Wright," he yelled. Behind him, Marceline in full designer wear, gripping someone's arm and pleading, "I told you she wasn't stable. This is a family matter. We'll resolve it privately." I watched the moment Landrick was handcuffed. The camera shook as someone nearby shouted, "You stole from your own legacy!" And I closed the video, deleted it, let history write itself. I didn't need revenge, just peace. The next morning, a courier delivered a small box. No return address, no markings. Inside was a faded photo. Gerald, much younger, holding a baby. Me. His face half smile, half worry. On the back, in his handwriting, "She will inherit more than the name. She will inherit the fight." Beneath it, a check. $10 million, payable to the scholarship fund I'd set up 2 years ago for students from rural towns with zero connections, zero legacy, but big dreams. I held the check like it was breathing. Someone out there understood. That night I came home early. The house wasn't grand, not anymore. I'd sold the mansion. downsized to a home with creaky floors, chipped counters, and a yard where my adopted daughter, Nora, could chase butterflies. She was at the kitchen table, legs swinging as she squinted over her math workbook. I tossed my bag onto the couch and slid into the seat beside her. "Need help?" She pointed to a stubborn word problem and grumbled, "It doesn't make sense." I laughed. "Neither does half of life. Let's figure it out anyway." As we solved the last equation, she suddenly asked, "Is it true you own a billion-dollar company?" I paused, brushed a crumb from her cheek, and looked her in the eyes. "I inherited more than that, sweetheart. I inherited the choice to be different." She smiled, unconvinced but content, then went back to her pencil. Outside, dusk gave way to quiet. No applause, no threats, just dishes in the sink, laundry in the basket, and the strange, comforting silence of a life that no longer needed proving. I sat still for a while, hands wrapped around a cooling mug, listening to Nora hum as she colored the margin of her page, and I thought, family isn't what you're born into, it's what you protect, even when it doesn't protect you. And sometimes, it's what you walk away from, to finally see yourself clearly,